Welcome, everyone, to my channel. A brief deviation from Nietzsche and Beyond Good and Evil, and we'll be beginning next week on part 7. But today I'm with Travanti again, and we've decided to read some fragments of Heraclitus. We've heard Heraclitus in both Nietzsche and Montaigne, sometimes in the essays, the personal notes of Emerson, and briefly in the discourses of Livy from Machiavelli. Now, who is Heraclitus? Or for his city name, Heraclitus of Ephesus, which that city is now in Turkey, which was a Persian a Persian occupied city at the time. And while he was inside the city, he was almost granted the title of king or principe in that same city. The studies of subject for Heraclitus would be cosmology, fire, elements, and logos. Logos is a Greek. It's a rough translation from Greek, say for reason or rationality, but people normally accept reason. And outside of that, he's labeled as the weeping and dark philosopher. Weeping philosopher because Democritus was the laughing philosopher. It was slander upon Heraclitus. The dark philosopher was that nickname was coined from Plato and Aristotle for the extremities and odd proclamations of Heraclitus because there's three principles of Heraclitus. One of is everything is in continual flux, while at the same time opposites are relative. And that proposes everything is and isn't at the same time. Complex, nuance, but today we'll be reading the fragments. And we're not reading the entire fragments for the audience, but we'll read selections that you personally decide. So why not you read the first fragment?
Okay, let's do it. All right, so we're going to read number 1. And this goes directly to your introduction because it's on the logos.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, although this logos is eternally valid, yet men are unable to understand it, not only before hearing it, but even after they have heard it for the first time. That is to say, although all things come to pass in accordance with this logos, men seem to be quite without any experience of it, at least if they are judged in the light of such words and deeds as I am here setting forth. My own method is to distinguish each thing according to its nature, and to specify how it behaves. Other men, on the contrary, are as neglectful of what they do when awake as they are when asleep. So that is fragment 1.
And it's the one fragment that's preserved almost in its entirety, too. It's the longest fragment. And, 150 plus fragments to say? So, now that we're discussing the logos, Heraclitus saw the logos as a rational structure and order inside the universe. He advocated for social harmony, both on a universal and Earth level too. And there's a story where every time he enters a city, village, or metropolitan, he would preach of everything of the unity of opposites and the flexicity too. And people would think, "What's this man on about?" And that includes the weeping moniker, where Democritus said, "This man, he only wants change. He only wants becoming. So now he weeps in the time of his darkness."
Yeah, so the interesting thing about Heraclitus is that when we speak of the logos, he is he's essentially our authority on it. The word was common, it was used in other contexts, and if we're thinking about the logos as a mere colloquialism, one of the best translations of it would be speech or
Mhm.
word. For example, in Plato's writings, he says, at least in his letters, in the epistolary tradition, he says that he was able to convince Dion of the truth through logoi, or speeches, words. And then obviously, this word logos is used to describe Jesus in the Gospel of John, and that brings me to the
Yep.
point is that you said that logos was defined as reason. Certainly, there's a way of looking at it that way, but it's also bigger than that
Hmm.
because when you are a process philosopher like Heraclitus, you run into a paradox. If everything is in flux, how can anything be said to be? If everything is in continuous movement, how can you differentiate one thing from the other, which is what he says. He says, my own method is to distinguish each thing according to its nature and to specify how it behaves. There's no way that you can do that if we are in continuous flux unless there is some sort of invisible order, some sort of uh, unassailable structure that, if anything, at least gives the appearance of stasis, of being. And that is what the Logos is. And this is why Christian commentators have said that the philosophers of ancient Greece were anticipating Christianity before Jesus ever showed up. They were looking for something that could explain the way the world works. And for the Apostle Paul, they find it in Jesus, who says, all the riches of wisdom are found in the Christ, basically. And so, yes, it's reason, it's speech, it's the word, it's all of these things, but it's more than that. It's it's the underlying structure of a world that is continuously in flux.
Yes. And when you were describing the Gospels earlier, I think it's in Genesis that in the early translations they don't say and the Word was with God and the Word was God. They would say the Logos was with God and the Logos was is God. And
Yeah,
yeah, my
John.
translation.
Yeah.
Hmm. My translation, which is translated from Brooks Haxton, they have not logos but word. And continuing forward, what you're saying, and what Heraclitus is saying, this is my translation. Some blundering with what I said before you, try in vain with empty talk to separate the essence or nature of things and say how each thing truly is. That part is him anticipating, not anticipating, but deviating from Parmenides of Ela, who was in continual uh this permanent unit being, which Heraclitus disagreed with, as we'll see every time that he loved flux, while Parmenides was a static, fixed being individual. While at the same time, he was I think the grandfather of ontology and metaphysics and a priori arguments too, and to a degree some logic or the forefather of logic.
Yeah, and the thing about Parmenides is Parmenides, more than anything, is the great witness for the fact that everything is unified. That behind the appearance of differentiation, behind the appearance of diversity, there's actually unity. There's oneness. Once you really get to the heart of things, there's oneness. And he makes a similar argument about motion. But again, he runs into a paradox in the sense that, okay, if everything is one, you have to be able to give us an adequate explanation for mathematics, for the fact that we live in a pluralistic universe. Why? And Heraclitus, and I argue that Plato kind of combines the philosophies of Heraclitus, Parmenides, and Pythagoras into his own sort of synthesis. But Heraclitus is giving him an answer. No, everything is in flux, but behind the flux, there is the logos.
Correct. It's inside one of his principles of opposites are relational or identical, and depending on the translation. People first see that and say, "Well, how is cold and hot or good and bad equal? They flux. There's an intermediate phase, and with that mediation, it's either a resource of the good or the resource of a bad. Same with the hot and cold. Same with a male and female. Yes, polar opposites, but at the same time, they're united.
I would agree.
There's a where he says, "Try in vain with empty talk to separate the two of things and say each thing truly is." That's his testimony, but at the same time, while he's denying and refuting other testimonies with his, he has this lack of justifying the senses or the instincts in what I'm reading because he's concentrated on this word, this logos.
Absolutely. And in fact, that kind of bleeds into the next uh, fragment, which was, I believe, two.
Two, yes.
So you want to read that, or do you want me to?
I'll read my translation and you can read yours.
Okay.
At fragment 2, for wisdom, listen not to me, but to the word, and know that all is one. How similar is yours?
Very different. So mine says, we should let ourselves be guided by what is common to all. Yet although the Logos is common to all, most men live as if each of them had a private intelligence of his own.
So my translation is simplifying to for wisdom what that allness is, but the theme is present in in what we're speaking of. So we'll simplify it to yes, the wisdom is inside it, but here not Heraclitus himself, but what the logos and the word is presenting itself as from perception to say of this unifying factor. What I hear every time of this unifying factor is Hegel's dialect. And and this is and previously on the first fragments too. These two play delightfully with one another. And oh, Hegel was influenced, and he confessed in some of his works that he was influenced from Heraclitus. And that's rare from philosophers that they truly confess that they were influenced from people. Um, People love to simplify the dialectic to thesis, antithesis, synthesis, but that simplification excludes Aufheben, determinate, negation, and etc. etc. Other terms that he's coined. But this fragment 2 plays well with the second part of fragment 1, my translation of, and all that rest make no attempt. They no more see how they behave broad waking than remember clearly what they did asleep, aka in in a catatonic state. He's relating how when people are conscience, and versus how they are in a catatonic state or unconscious if you substitute it for that sleeping state. Or yes, that sleeping state. They he's relating that to people who blindly accept.
Yeah, the other thing that I want to think about in terms of my translation is this.
Mm-hmm.
He he is he is really bucking the the basis, the foundation for paganism. Paganism is a pluralistic way of approaching the world. Well, where we live in a world where there are many different approaches to reality. But here, he's saying that there is a common reason, there is an objective world that we, with our little logoi,
Mm-hmm.
should be guided by. There's something that is higher than every man's private fancy,
Mm-hmm.
and he said we should be guided by it. Now this is in many respects the birth of the idea of justice as we understand it. Not merely justice because in the sense of like Zeus, because Zeus was the god of justice, and he would you know if somebody did something wrong, Zeus would like send the Furies after them or something of that nature. But this is apart from Zeus. This is the idea that there is a truth that exists above and beyond what each person thinks, and it's common to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of like a higher order of truth is the one of the first principles of aristocratism. The aristocratic uh, pathos, the aristocratic mindset is that amongst the many, the hoi polloi, you'll find a bunch of different opinions that are conflicting, but there's something that arises above them, that's above the hoi polloi, and it's truth. Now, my personal opinion, I know that his aristocratic background was the fact that in Ephesus his family held some sort of hereditary post and they would preside over religious services, and that's about as elevated as you can get. That's something that even kings had to respect, was
Mm-hmm.
religion, because the gods are higher than kings, and you don't want to mess with their services because that can spell disaster for you. So anybody who uh, curated and presided over those rituals and those services was a person who was of elevated rank. But he didn't like it. He abandoned it and he let his brother take over. However, I think that it taught him something very important, and it's that beyond the world of the human all too human, there is something that an independent minded thinker can appeal to, and that is the logos.
Mm-hmm. And that showed his detachment from a form of fatherland or nation or location. And from that detachment, including if this fatherland or nation were prideful but in the state of corruption and dilapidation, he still willingly detached from it for his personal journey. There's a there's a fragment, number 4 for me, where where I'm thinking that he's no, not thinking, but interpreting that he's criticizing that form of aristocracy, where he says people dull their wits with gibberish and cannot use their ears and eyes.
Okay, so hmm, You know what? That's interesting. So what I got from that was seekers after gold dig up much earth and find little.
Is that your fragment for?
Yeah, isn't that weird? I mean, maybe this is fragment 22 because wait,
Because
would you read your four again?
people dull their wits with gibberish and cannot use their ears and eyes.
Hmm, very interesting. I don't. Okay,
Because
I don't.
my fragment 8 is men dig tons of earth to find an ounce of gold.
Okay, so you know what? Some of these might not be in common. My fragment 8 is I have searched myself. So we probably should have figured out which
And
translation we were. I didn't know they were out of order.
no worries. Continuing forward, we'll use your translation, and I can interpret it on initial reaction or
Okay.
or instinct.
Okay, yeah. So okay, what was read yours again, number 8. Well, I mean number 4. Could you read
Number
that
four,
again?
people dull their wits with gibberish and cannot use their ears and eyes.
Okay, so to me that's aristocratic again because the people he's talking about are the many. He was extremely contemptuous of the many. And then my fragment 4 says, seekers after gold dig up much earth and find little. The gold is that which is rare and precious, i.e., the few,
Yes.
and the earth is what is common and not very valuable.
Mm-hmm. And that's parallel to what I was interpreting. Yes, he's his contempt to the majority, while he includes the fake aristocrats in his hometown. He includes that same contempt to the majority from the people of Ephes.
Yeah, so that my version of 8 is I have searched myself, and you found that somewhere else. What was it for you?
Oh, my 8 is men dig tons of earth for a single piece of gold.
Yeah, that's the same one. So for me, it's I have searched myself, and I think if if no one else was inspired by this, Socrates certainly was. I have searched
Yeah.
myself.
Mm-hmm.
This more than anything is the foundation of philosophy. This was the method of Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes wrote the Leviathan by studying his own interiority, his own feelings, his own mindset. Nietzsche too, Hegel too, Kant too, Aristotle, Plato. The one of the biggest misconceptions about philosophy is that it is synonymous with science. It's not.
True.
Science Science is about the world of extension, the world of the space-time continuum. It definitionally lies outside of us. And so it is absolutely contingent upon sense perception. But philosophy is not about that. Philosophy is about the human condition, which has to do with the human soul. And the logos, which lives inside of us and corresponds to this invisible order, meaning it can only be accessed through reason because you can't see it by the senses, that is something that you have to search for from within. And so, to all of these ignoramuses who say, "Oh, science took the place of philosophy," no, it didn't.
No, no.
No, it didn't. We can continue searching the world out there and not arrive at anything approximating the truths that come from within. Philosophy is the study of mankind's inner world, mankind's inner self. I have searched myself. That is the beginning of philosophy, not I studied, you know, particles and all that. Albert Einstein, brilliant mathematician, brilliant physicist. He's not a philosopher. He can't tell you anything about the human condition. He can only tell you about uh, gravity and relativity. That's different from what philosophy does. Philosophy begins with knowledge of oneself, because if you understand yourself, you can make inferences about other people and therefore derive universal truths.
Mm-hmm. And influences, because you saying Albert Einstein, he's outside of the philosophical world, but at the same time, he's participating in his method and his personal science of philosophy, which includes the Heraclitean influence of Heraclitus from Plato, Aristotle, Marcus Aurelius, because in Meditations, the preface, the translators say, um, like a synopsis of he wasn't a real stoic, but he collected everything as much as he can, and that included the full translation, or at that time the full inscriptions of On Nature, which is Heraclitus' his work. Well, at the same time, it's Parmenides' work too. They both named their works On Nature.
Well, right. I think on nature might have been Lucretia, Lucretius, who was a
Lucre-
Stoic. Yeah,
yeah,
he
Lucretius.
wrote. Yeah, he's the one who wrote on nature, and he was actually a Roman writer. But
Hmm.
yeah, that no. Here's the thing. Einstein was a part of a different tradition of philosophy that kind of broke away, which was Phusis. There was physical philosophy, the Milesian philosophers who were also a part of Asia Minor, which is where the city of Ephesus is, or is and was. And that's definitely one thing. But when we're talking about the type of work that Socrates did, which was moral philosophy. You have to know yourself, and the great scientists of the modern scientific era, whether it was Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, Kepler, and of course
Robert
Einstein.
Hooke.
Huh?
Robert Hooke.
Oh, yeah, the list goes on and on. Marie Curie, all these people, they they were less concerned with introspection than they were uh, looking at the outer world. And in fact, it was because of men like Galileo that people became very distrustful of the inner world because it wasn't quantifiable, and so they wanted to focus on the realm that could be quantified. But in this way, you're abandoning philosophy.
That's true. And when we're speaking of this, Nietzsche said a great complimenting quote and criticism of Heraclitus, but it's primarily a compliment, and the second half is a criticism, not of Heraclitus. Quote, but Heraclitus will remain eternally right with his assertion that being is an empty fiction. The air quote apparent world, aka the earth, is the only one. The true air quote world is merely added by a lie. And you can it's palpable that science is seen as this true world, while the second source is the world of the instincts, the senses, the passions, ideas, etc., on the physical world. Something that's metaphysical is in the eyes of modern science. And Heraclitus, he did aspire and influence Albert Einstein for his relativity theory.
Okay, yeah. Um, so then I was thinking we could look at my version of 10, whatever that is. It could be 112, I don't know. But it says, to be temperate is the greatest virtue. Wisdom consists in speaking and acting the truth, giving heed to the nature of things. So,
Ah,
yes.
my 10 is short. It's things keep their secrets.
Okay, so yeah,
Oh, did you mute yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I did. It says mine is this. That same one is 17. It says nature loves to hide. So the reason why I highlighted 10 was because again, this is another aristocratic um, ethic. So part of the worldview of people contemptuous of the mob is that the mob is always full of hubris. They are prone to extremism. We're seeing that, we're Americans in the 21st century, and we see that now in the age of mass politics. We see the extreme left becoming more and more prominent in Democratic circles, and we see the extreme right becoming more and more or actually taking over the Republican Party. And what for Heraclitus, this is par for the course. Of course they are. You live in a democracy. Of course, the mob, the crowd, is going to run to one side of uh, the continuum. This, it's like a pendulum swinging. But he says real virtue is always directly in the center. It is a mediation between opposites. That is true virtue.
Same with Apollo and Dionysus, two polar opposite individuals, one of rational beauty and the other for irrational chaos.
Absolutely. And you can take both to an extreme. I can personally testify to this. So my first um my first semester of college as a philosophy student, I remember I became extremely hyper rational. Little maybe I went a little bit too far on the side of Apollo, and it I felt I felt that I did damage to myself. That, well, not like permanent damage, but I was like, I feel weird. This need for like psychological logical, not psychological, for logical consistency in everything, and this incredibly high burden of proof. I won't believe something unless it can be demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt. It just completely messed with my mind, and I was like, wow, this is miserable. And so I wound up, going to a therapist and just kind of talking myself through this, and eventually I realized, Travanti, your emotions are valid. Reconnect with that. And the minute I did that, I started feeling better. Now, arguably later, maybe I went a little bit too far trusting in my emotions. But at that time, like most people in our society, I had a tendency to veer from one extreme to the other. And it was only when I began to discover that um, the two are there to sort of give each other balance. You don't want to lean too heavily into your emotions, and you don't want to lean too heavily into reason, because either can become a form of hubris. They must calibrate one another, and that is the mark of a well ordered soul.
To add a noble soul.
Why, thank you.
You're welcome. Because the noble soul, and to define, noble soul is an individual who establish and have this self-cultivating values for themselves, and it's a selfish sense, a aristocratic virtue, not or virtue, and that sense of virtue. And people frown and belittle that aristocratic value of being this form of selfishness. And you're correct with that pendulum swing. I relate to it, where at age 17, reading Spinoza, Kant, and Hegel in that order, I was like fixated on mathematics, um, science, logic, and and at the same time astronomy. Till I became a Trotskyist, or a extreme version of communism, where I was both logical and emotional. The emotional part was depending on what provoked me because of that hypersensitive, irrational, the hypersensitive denial and blinding effect of what that extreme is. And this is relevant to what you were saying of the left and right, two poles, polar of one another, where in between the mediation phase is the majority or the herd who are fixated on what values, pre-established values, these right and left extremes serve for us. Oh,
Ab-
the individualism will go there. Equality will go there. Industry will go there. Liberalize the markets will go there.
I love that you were reading all of those incredibly difficult authors at the age of 17, and then I love the fact that you went through a Trotskyist phase. Um, I think I think I think that's a part of being a young intellectual, and just like I think we have to pass through phases and then arriving at where you are now. And you know what you're talking about, how unbalanced we've become as a culture. This is because um, the aristocratic principle has been completely abandoned in American society. America is a very old democracy, but a real solid upper class, and by upper class, I don't mean an oligarchy, which is what we have now, but an actual upper class that embodied exactly what we're talking about, this Heraclitian mean, was always present. It was always there, and we see it in presidents like Teddy Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman and so on and so forth. And even some of the framers, actually most of the framers,
Mhm.
Jefferson, Hamilton, things of that nature. And as the aristocratic center of American democracy became more and more diluted by money men rather than class men, it it crumbled, it collapsed. It doesn't exist anymore. We've got rich and poor, but we've got no high and low. We've just got low everywhere, and rich people who we've got uh, vulgarity in high places. And so what's happened is that it's created a scenario that William Butler Yeats described in the famous poem, The Second Coming, which I'll recite just a few of the verses. He says, turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center, breed aristocratic center, cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Um, that's what's happened. We no longer have a center in American society, and as a result, we've got polarization, which Heraclitus would call hubris.
Mm-hmm. While at the same time, this polarization is hubris, but complementary of the innocence of both natures. And people don't realize that these innocence that and this comes with conscious innocence. Because in the modern moral age, there's conscious guilt, where everything outside of what is reasonable, convenient, and advantageous is labeled evil. Why I say they're innocent of one another and complementary, because the innocence is how they naturally function, in the sense of they have the self-preserved values and morals that they've rationalized creatively, elaboratively, and that circuiting of rationalization, because that's how they direct their energy or how they direct their logos to. It's not the justification of the structured morality in religions or philosophy and history inside it, but it's a realization, well, lack of realization of their body. That's where my elitist mind comes to play. Of the body is the excellent truth, or the excellence itself. Verse and its little brother, or mediocre truth, I say, is reason and logic and knowledge, or secondary in the sense of as a tool. The body is the formulates one's beliefs, virtues, and values. Virtues, values, and morals. While in modernity, or the modern age, people are influenced left, right, horizontal, vertical, sideward, etc., etc., which becomes unconscious virtues. And I say they're unconsciously innocent of that, because that's how they differentiate themselves from me, but they become indifferent from one another.
Interesting. I was looking at our list and I'm like, there's no way we're gonna get through all of this. Why I did you have a chance to peruse some of these because I'm thinking we might want to pick some of the ones that we really liked and then like close out with maybe like two or three more. I don't know what were you thinking?
Yes, of staying the ones that we favor, and then
Yeah.
finish with two or three impactful ones.
Okay.
You say the first one that you favored.
Okay. Um okay, so this one made me laugh. In my book it's 102. He says donkeys would prefer hay to gold.
That that itself justifies what I was saying earlier.
There are so many ways to read this aphorism.
Hmm.
Okay, so for one thing, you could read it in the most charitable way, which is that if this is a metaphor for people, not everything is appropriate for everyone. So if let's say like I'm a donkey, okay, it makes no sense for people to expect me to have any use for gold because I need it. Gold isn't going to feed me. It's not going to sustain me. There's no value that I can attach to that. But if I am a man, as indeed I am, hay isn't going to appeal to me in the same way that maybe gold will. And so I see this as again another dig at the many whom he is comparing to donkeys. They don't treasure wisdom, which is what gold represents, to the extent that the philosopher does.
And that ties with the my fragment 8. 1 second. And I have two interpretations of your 102. But that ties with men dig tons of earth to find an ounce of gold. The first interpretation of combining these two is the arrogant simple-mindedness of people not realizing their opportunity, potentiality, and innovation of their life, thus they continue what is reasonable, advantaged, and convenient. The other interpretation is what you were saying, but I have a historical example. Diogenes humbling Alexander the Great. He's the donkey, and Alexander's the gold, offering, bestowing, and sacrificing riches and wealth for him after he conquered his city. And Diogenes simply said, "Move. I prefer the sun." For Diogenes, the sun is his wheat, but at the same time, that wheat or grain is his gold.
Yeah, I mean that's actually a great example. Um, their values, and you can't expect everybody to value the same thing because their nature may preclude that possibility. Um, there's one more. Actually, it's not one more. It's actually three combined, and for me it's 76, 77, and 78. So, and this is again another reason why people would say that once the Greeks began philosophizing, there was this sort of inexorable movement towards Christianity, and it's because they grew more and more discontent with the state of affairs, specifically religion, in Greece. So this is what he says: night walkers, magicians, bacchantes, revelers, and participants in the mysteries. What are regarded as mysteries among men are unholy rituals. Their processions and their phallic hymns would be disgraceful exhibitions, were it not that they are done in honor of Dionysus. But Dionysus, in whose honor they rave and hold revels, is the same as Hades. When defiled, they purify themselves with blood, as though one who had stepped into filth were to wash himself with filth. If any of his fellow men should perceive him acting in such a way, they would regard him as mad. Wow.
My immediate thought is while traveling with these ritualistic, symbolic, narrative, and narrow people, it's time to overcome this form of poetry, myth making, for nature shows the true and palpable wisdom, while at the same time, as you were clarifying earlier, it's a form of social intolerance of the religion that was presented because of the slow polarization of paganism and the philosophizing of Greek of the Greek mentality, which that itself becomes an um a objectification or objectification of the instinct, where it becomes on a if you heard the Muslim author named Ibn Khaldun.
The name doesn't ring a bell.
He has an idea which will tie beautifully with this, the idea of asabia, where a collective unit, well, not well, the collective people forge their form of society in from their instincts, passions, and fire, hence the asabia term. This is what I'm hearing in where the philosophizing and the polarization of this nation in ancient Greece is becoming the the objectification or objectification the objective of the instinct, where they're forming a separate nation both on a philosophical, scientifical, rational scale and governmental scale of how they're having this intolerance of a deharmonized society.
Right, and also he's looking at this order, this structure called the logos, which can only be inferred because it can't be really seen. And he's comparing that with these rituals that people are participating in, and he's disgusted. He's like, how does this make sense? He's like, Hades is the god of like death, and he's here we are with Dionysus kind of celebrating death. People are being bathed in blood, and he's like, this is not moral. This doesn't make any sense. They're unholy. I mean, to say that about the religion of your culture, that it's an unholy religion, that is a really really strong statement. This is definitely a period of enlightenment.
And
Un,
similar to what Socrates saw.
yeah, same thing. Socrates was a critic of uh, Greek religion, just like Heraclitus is a critic of it, and they weren't the only ones. Even though he criticizes Xenophanes, Xenophanes is a critic of Greek religion. I think it was he who said what they call ISIS is a cloud. So they're waking up to the fact that something is wrong here, and we want something more. So it's not a surprise to me that some of the first Gentile converts to Christianity were Greeks, because it seemed as though this is what they had been searching for in the schools of philosophy for many generations.
Early monastic and artistic style of Christianity too. And they were that pertains to what I was saying earlier of Asabia, or the object objective of the instinct, where this disharmony and now seeking a harmony, which provided the early Christianity from the converts of early Greeks, which Heraclitus and other individuals, including Socrates himself, saw this disharmony and disassociation with the previous old order.
Absolutely. I mean, I know paganism has become incredibly faddish nowadays, and people want to return to ancestral gods and worshiping Odin and Thor, and though that's like European stuff. But then there's also a movement in African American culture, and they want to like worship like the gods of the Yoruba, like ancient African gods, and in Asia it's the same thing with those ancestral spirits. And the thing is, if the pagan world was so appealing, you wouldn't have people like Xenophanes and Heraclitus and Socrates and Plato and Aristotle criticizing it. These were insiders. They experienced it, and they turned their noses up at it. So for me, if anything, thinkers like him are a testament to the fact that we are moving in a direction, historically and culturally speaking. And I think becoming aware of that is to become wise.
In a personal sense, because your form of wisdom be different from mine.
Yeah.
But you're correct. The observation of now this fanatic obsession with neo-paganism is the same effect as socialism too, of a desire for an atavistic need to primitive communalism, because of having this inner contempt, insecurity too, and aversion to modern industry and liberalization of the economic markets.
Absolutely.
It's nonetheless they they're polar opposites. One says equality for all, and the other says unequal for all. While at the same time, they're promoting this atavistic need of primitive communalism, which is oddly similar to early Christians, the monastics that we spoke of.
Yeah, there's hubris on both sides, and there's very little temperance.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And this elicits my contempt. No, not my contempt, but my this not despair, but despising of their interpretation of Nietzsche. Ooh, the will to power in a pagan sense.
it's like, do you really think Nietzsche wanted you to start worshiping Odin again and Thor and practicing voodoo and stuff. It's like that's what you got out of that. Yeah, let's go back and sacrifice it. People.
That's
That's
that's what
that.
you continue first. Well, I think
Oh, I was gonna say that's the hoi polloi. That's the many. They take somebody and they boulderize it and they dumb it down and they do to Nietzsche in American society now what Hitler and the Nazis did to him during world during you know the during the Weimar Republic. It's they make it palatable to suit their own tastes rather than trying to understand what was he actually saying.
similar to Heraclitus, drastically, well, not drastically, but utterly similar to what Heraclitus, and why he's named the dark and weeping philosopher.
Agreed.
We'll continue forward before I have my adamant thoughts of this aristocratic revivalism.
Oh, I mean, you can provide the wrapping up summary. I mean, what we've discussed, I think, is really encapsulated the essence of who he was. I think so. So,
And this fragment too. This will be the final fragment of tonight. Fragment 20. My fragment 20. That which was always and is and will ever be everlasting fire. The same for all. The cosmos, made neither by God nor man, replenishes in measure as it burns away. End quotes. And that replenishing of fire is tied to Herodotus' quote of the body is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to kindle. Because while self-preservation or discharging, well, self-preservation and replenishing is a frequent but indirect effect from discharging, say, the instincts, the passions, etc., this form of power. That's why he was saying replenishment is a measure of burning away, or that slow kindle of the flames. And the cosmos is where majority of the people would disagree. That's where he has this rational and and logical structure of the cosmos, which to a degree it's playful and naive, depending on the day that people read it, and how I read it too. But what truly solidifies his opposition to paganism was that it's neither made by God nor man. That this eternal flame is perpetual, while at the same time it lashes at itself.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah, he says also, man is not rational. There is intelligence only in what encompasses him. He also
Mm-hmm.
says what is divine escapes men's notice because of their incredulity. That's incredible. No, yeah.
Delightful.
Terrific.
Well, this will be part one of a multiple series of Heraclitus. Appreciate everybody for watching. I appreciate Travanti for accepting the invitation again.
Thanks
We'll
for
see
having
you
me.
every time, mate. Every time. And we'll see everybody next time. I'm Orfati. Love your fate.